Hey all, your OS reviews. Today we're taking a closer look at the new B30 Pro 5G. This is their current flagship here in 2024, and again tries to deliver excellent value for the money. Some of you guys may remember that a few months back we checked out the new A25, which was pretty impressive for having a large 6.7-inch AMOLED fast refresh rate 120Hz display, and this time around the B30 Pro 5G basically upgrades upon those foundations and most of the specs. For example, the processor has gone from a Helio G99 from here over to a Dimensity 1050, which is a rebranded version of the Dimensity 1080. It's still 6 nanometers, but the clock speed has increased, so it's going to be a little bit faster and more responsive, particularly in the GPU department, and also the cameras have been upgraded in terms of resolution, going from 50 megapixels on the primary now up to 108 megapixels. You also have a 32 megapixel front-facing camera compared to 8 megapixels. RAM has been upgraded to 12 gigabytes, which can be further augmented in the settings with the virtual RAM up to 20 GBs compared to 6 gigabytes on the A25, as well as double the storage, going from 128 gigs to 256 gigabytes on the base model over here, which is still further expandable via a micro SD card slot. And it still retains a relatively large 5,000 milliamp hour capacity battery inside, along with an all-new design that you can tell just makes it look a little bit more premium from afar, with a glass finish on the back as well as the front, although the side rails are constructed out of polycarbonate plastic like before. The cameras, though, definitely protrude out from the edge of the phone a little bit more compared to the A25, as you can tell, so that is one trade-off of having a slightly more impressive sensor and setup, although an included TPU case in the box can make that almost flat when you're lying it down, and the ring along the camera here is also constructed out of metal. By the way, there's also an 8 megapixel ultra-wide and also a 2 megapixel macro lens. Would have preferred a telephoto zoom lens instead, but for a more budget-oriented phone, it is what it is, along with an LED flash. Located on the bottom, you have the USB Type-C port, and there's also stereo speakers on the B30 Pro 5G, another upgrade compared to the A25. So sound quality is going to be much more immersive, coming out from the bottom as well as the top of the phone over here, although you no longer have a standard 3.5mm headphone jack, so that is one omission, though you can use wireless Bluetooth or a dongle, and it does come with other connectivity, including, of course, 5G cellular, support for dual-band Wi-Fi 6, as well as GPS, NFC for contactless mobile payment. I will say, though, that, again, as a more affordable phone, one spec that is not present on the B30 Pro 5G would be Qi wireless charging support. Edges here are also flattened this time around, again giving it just a slightly more stylish appearance. The right-hand spine houses the volume rocker as well as the power key that all feel relatively tactile. And in the box, aside from the TPU case as well as a quick user guide, you do get a USB Type-C cable, SIM card ejector pin, as well as a charging adapter that supports quick charge. One of the other notable changes to the design this time around is going to be the display is slightly curved on the left and right sides. So from an aesthetic point of view, it makes the bezels seem even slimmer. In fact, for a sub-$300 phone, gotta say that the screen quality is still top-notch, just like on the A25. The bezels are almost completely symmetrical, giving it just a beautiful look as you're consuming media with this large panel. That being said, curved edges might be a little bit controversial since it does increase the likelihood of some potential accidental triggers as you're gripping the phone. Regardless, it is a trade-off for making the design just look more beautiful from afar. So there's a hole punch cut out for the, again, selfie lens, and taking a closer look at the software now, we have a fairly clean version of Android 13, and NUU has promised a upgrade to Android 14, and the overall experience is pretty much unsolicited aside from just the standard Google apps that come on board. Taking a closer look at advanced settings, there are a few customizations, which is inclusive of, under Intelligent Assistance, the virtual RAM expansion. As aforementioned, this isn't really the same thing as physical RAM, but it borrows some of the ROM, basically, to simulate RAM and slightly improve the multitasking experience, again, getting up to 20 gigabytes combined, which is quite impressive. You also are able to take screenshots by swiping down with 3 fingers, double tap to wake as well as lock the display. Split screen multitasking view can also be triggered by swiping up with 3 fingers, and you're able to just divide the panel in half by doing 2 things at once, in addition to even long pressing on the volume up key to trigger the flashlight, as you can tell, which is a pretty neat shortcut. Other useful accessibility additions include the one-handed mode, which can also be triggered if you want to more easily maneuver all 4 corners of the phone. And then under display, we have the ability to turn on the aforementioned always on mode for showing the quick clock as well as notifications, and you can also customize what that always on display looks like, including the colors that are being shown. And further down below, we can go into My Tone, which allows you to customize the color grading of this display into more vivid or adjust the temperature yourself, although by default I think it already looks quite good. You're also able to change the screen's refresh rate. It's not LTPO, but you have the, again, fast 120 Hz, or you can dial it down to standard 60 to consume a little bit less power. Overall, it makes swiping along the UI feel relatively responsive. Even things like the charging animation can also be customized, along with whether you want the status bar there to hide the hole punch cutout for the selfie lens. It turns it completely dark, as you can tell, which is pretty convincing since this is a AMOLED screen, which means that when it's showing black images, no pixels are being emitted. Furthermore, you can swipe from the edge of the phone and hold for an extra second to pull up a bar of commonly used applications. It's something that we have seen on, for instance, Samsung's One UI, but can be neat, taking advantage of the curved edges in that particular gesture, feeling quite smooth. I'll also mention that to take advantage of the curved edges, they also have edge lighting on this device as well. Alert you that something is coming in, even as you're placing the phone face down. It's another cool addition that we have seen on some other curved screen phones from Samsung in the past. So surprisingly, quite a few things you're able to adjust, again with plenty of storage on board as well out of the box. Further expandable using that micro SD card slot with the hybrid SIM tray, since it is a dual SIM device. And even charging, there is an adaptive mode that can prolong the battery health by preventing it from getting to 100% every single time. And taking a quick look at the camera experience next, as aforementioned, it's a slight improvement versus the A25 in terms of resolution and detail you're able to hit. This overall layout, though, is still quite similar to before. We have the ability to toggle into HDR as well as AI modes, which can be both flicked on at the same time, interestingly enough, to increase the contrast as well as recognition of what is seen should look like to get you the best results. You can also play around with settings including resolution, geotagging, grid composition here as well, and also switch back and forth between the ultra wide angle, the 2x digital crop, the primary, and further on the slider here you can go into the portrait bokeh mode. There's a beauty mode that will soften the skin, panoramic shots for even wider field, and here under more you get the full 108 megapixel mode as well. So by default, when you're taking photos, it captures it at 12 megapixels to save on space, but you can find, again, a higher resolution profile here along with time-lapse, and Pro mode will allow you to change properties including ISO, white balance manually, along with the macro mode can also be found under that More setting. A night mode is also available for increasing exposure time to capture slightly better looking results in darker environments, and video here can be captured up to 4K resolution. And reviewing some of the sample images here, this one was taken using the night mode. It was actually very dark in the surroundings, but still looks decent in terms of colors. Of course, the night mode per se will not really beat a Pixel or an iPhone in this regard when it comes to computational photography, but again, for a more affordable smartphone, I think it's doing a fair job as long as you hold relatively still. By the way, you can even change the watermark settings, so you can have displayed here kind of a logo or a text that you can customize what it says, or of course turn the watermark off as well. And here's the example of the 2 megapixel macro lens, which does allow you to get relatively up close, but again, not the highest res thing in the world. Still, it can be fun to play around with at times. And you can tell that in outdoor conditions, when there is sufficient lighting, that's really where this camera performs best, especially with HDR and also the AI scene detection, still preserving some textures in the clouds and contrast, including shadows, aren't getting crushed too much. By the way, this is the 108 megapixel mode, so you are able to crop in quite a lot. In fact, just doing an example here, we can zoom in all the way into the tree branch, kind of see the green moss here, although it does take up a little bit more file size, and in this case around 61 megabytes. For comparison, here's the same shot taken in the regular 12 megapixel mode, and you can tell that we're able to zoom in to this particular extent. So not quite as much cropping is available, though again, it's still going to preserve an overall similar looking image from afar in terms of contrast and colors, and it also takes up less space, only about 6.9 megabytes. Otherwise, here's an example of the ultra-wide angle lens, a little bit softer because it is, again, 8 megapixels compared to the 108, but still it has decent overall correction for lens distortion, I would say. The edges here are not getting curved off too dramatically, and you are able to capture more within the frame of the shot without having to step as far back, which can be nice to have. And this is a 2x digital zoom, so overall still looks decent at this extent, but of course the furthermore you zoom in from this point onwards, we'll start to lose out a little bit more on detail. It's certainly not a shabby looking camera for this price range, and I think it has a similar approach to some Samsung Galaxy devices, which is giving you a little bit more extra boost and saturation to the images, perhaps not the most realistic, but definitely makes them look relatively attractive. You can always go into the Pro mode and dial that down yourself if desired. Now moving into a quick demo of what the speakers sound like and video playback is like on this phone, cranking up the sound. So all in all, as aforementioned, because of the stereo effect, you get a lot more separation and immersiveness as you're consuming media. Watching movies on YouTube or Netflix just becomes a bit more enjoyable compared to the mono speaker setup on the A25, along with many other budget-oriented phones we've seen in the past. So this is great with the built-in speakers, also doesn't sound too distorted at higher volume levels either. So pretty enjoyable, combined again with the beautiful looking colors of this AMOLED display, very vibrant and punchy. Very strong viewing angles. This is a great phone to use for media consumption, I would say. Things like scrolling around the UI, doing things like picture-in-picture mode doesn't really pose an issue for the phone. It still remains cool during operation. Similarly, the plastic bezels here also mean that reception quality has been fairly strong. So overall, I was able to remain pretty much tightly connected to Wi-Fi, even though we're a little bit further away from the router at the moment, along with 5G. Testing with T-Mobile here in the Seattle region, and that means scrubbing between parts of the video also load up almost instantly, as you can tell, so not too long in terms of buffering times at all. Now, one area though where the B30 Pro 5G is still kind of similar to the A25 would be haptic vibration motor. Like most other budget mid-range phones on here, it's merely average. And taking a quick look at some of the synthetic benchmarks next, as aforementioned, this Dimensity 750 efficiency seems to be well optimized, and it's relatively smooth, again, as you are just navigating around, doing system navigation. And a quick comparison here versus the Helio G99, again, found on the new A25 from before, we can tell that it is going to be a little bit more performant, especially here in terms of GPU is where you see the biggest gap, helping the phone feel just a little bit more smooth and responsive in day-to-day usage. Otherwise, if we compare it with Qualcomm Snapdragon 700 series chips, including the 778G, we can tell that it also stacks up relatively close. So I would say it's a comparable chipset to some of the mid-range offerings from Qualcomm when it comes to real-world performance. In fact, even a little bit faster versus some older flagship chips from yesteryear. As you can tell, has been mostly succeeded by the Dimensity 750 when it comes to overall efficiency and performance. So that should result in, for the most part, a more than good enough experience in this price range. The phone performs well as you're doing the basics and navigating around. Even web browsing here with a couple more tabs is still handled quite well, including The Verge. The desktop site, in fact, with plenty of videos and ads, is still loading back at a pretty smooth overall frame rate. I can zoom in and out, nothing really chugs or feels slow. Making calls and communication has also been quite strong and reliable on this phone, again with good reception quality along with a clear microphone with some ambient noise reduction capabilities as well, so had no issues when it came to, again, placing calls or texting. Similarly, the battery life also seems to be average, I would say. It definitely is good enough with a 5,000 milliamp hour cell to last through about a day and a half before I had to really recharge it again. And by the way, a basic voice recorder for memos as well as an FM radio are also built on in as some extras. Now taking a quick look at the gaming performance. Overall, again, the Dimensity 750 has been a fairly good performer. The smartphone doesn't really suffer from thermal throttling issues in my testing, so never got overly hot or dropped frames as I played for 30 to 40 minute sessions and still felt pretty cool during operation, which is good. There are no titles from the store that you aren't able to run and install on here, including even things like PUBG, Asphalt, for instance, Minecraft can all be played. Of course, for some of those titles, you may have to wait for just a split second longer if you are comparing them with true flagship devices, for instance, running on a 8 Gen 1 or 8 Gen 2 chip, but of course that would be kind of unreasonable for a more entry-level device like this to be paired against. All in all, I think it punches above its weight, and you'll still find it to be a pretty reliable performance for casual gaming, day-to-day use, social media. You really won't have too many issues here. Also, this beautiful display makes it a joy to use for anything that really consumes media with such small bezels, including things like reading back webtoons, for instance, PDFs, emails, documents, all shine and look great on this panel with those buttery smooth frame rates with the 120Hz refresh rate. So again, working quite well. So that is more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the, again, new B30 Pro 5G, and I have to say it shows this company's growing ambitions when it comes to now creating devices from a design perspective that is getting closer and closer to some of the mainstream larger players on the market, whether it's Xiaomi, Poco, so on and so forth. The display here is definitely top-notch. So all in all, it stacks up to be yet another great value option if you're looking for an unlocked Android smartphone that does the basics well and offers, again, just a slightly more stylish appearance this time around. That being said, I would say the A25 from before can still be a great option to consider as well if you just want a device that is even more affordable and offers a slightly more kind of flattened design, including a flat screen, that might be to some folks' preferences, and still performs quite well in its own right. It's just that the B30 Pro 5G has, again, even more upgraded specs pretty much all around, from the processor to the RAM, as well as the memory, that is just a little bit more eye-catching overall. So you can check out more details if interested in the links down below. Overall shows that, again, even budget smartphones these days are getting progressively better and better. This is a great representation of what you can expect here in 2024. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the new B30 Pro 5G.